Hi, my name is Anders Olsen, and this is my final project for the music writing class. The subject of my presentation is the relationship of women and the role of conductor in classical music. So, the conductor is the ultimate leadership role in classical music. It is a position that requires control and cooperation with the instrumentalist. The conductor's job is to interpret the musical structure and lines to present the audience with a representative performance of the composer's original intent. However, women seldom take this role as a profession. Although this is mostly due to historical disenfranchisement, the impacts of gender discrimination in classical music are still observed today. Because of the conductor's tremendous role in the performance of classical music, both in modern pieces and in pieces from the past, the implications of a gender bias in this profession can have an immense consequence on how classical music is interpreted and performed for the audience. An easy way to understand the role of conductor, because as an instrumentalist in an orchestra, I'm often asked, what exactly does a conductor do? An easy way to understand the role of conductor is to think of a symphony as one giant complex instrument. And if it is one giant instrument, the conductor would be the musician playing that instrument. So you understand why the characteristics of leadership and cooperation are so crucially important in the role of conductor. And in case you're wondering, the woman I've chosen to put on my first slide, her name is Maren Alsop. She is a very famous female conductor, and I will be talking about her shortly in the next slide. So, of the works performed, and this is just some statistical data on classical music and based on gender. And on the top right, this figure shows that of all the works performed by symphonies in the U.S., only 1.8% of those symphonies performed were by female composers. And when we control for only works by living composers, 14.3% of those works were female from female composers. This shows improvement because more women are participating in the composing portion of classical music, and therefore more of their works are getting performed. However, if this shows anything, it just shows how much farther we have to come to make a more gender equitable classical music industry. And keep in mind that these pieces performed by living composers are pieces that could be performed by future ensembles. So it is important that women begin to participate and get more of their works out there and performed. So when we look at the role of conductor, women only make up 20% of all the conductors in the US. And this is including all youth orchestras and high school orchestras and any other type of orchestra, maybe middle school orchestras. And in fact, women tend to predominantly work with youth orchestras as opposed to higher level symphonies. So when we control for high budget symphonies, women only make up 10% of the conductors. And this is usually for symphonies that are probably all professional. And in the highest level symphonies, the top 22 symphonies in the US, only one female conductor has a job in the higher level symphonies. And this woman is Maren Alsop, who is the woman who you saw on the first slide. Um, she is the conductor of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and she has had an illustrious career and has helped a lot with the gender discrimination in classical music. However, she is the only one in the top 22 symphonies. So if we controlled for the top 10 symphonies, you would see no female conductors. And hopefully this will change with time. Um, a couple other facts about gender discrimination in classical music. Many top symphonies in Europe, like Berlin and Vienna Philharmonic, were until a decade ago only male in their instrumentation and as conductors. Keep in mind that a lot of these European symphonies lead the classical music industry. So when you have the leaders of the industry openly discriminating, it doesn't bode well for the rest of the environment in the symphonies, especially for female instrumentalists or conductors or whomever's in the different roles in the profession. We see another gender gap in the number of doctoral degrees awarded for conducting to women versus men in the music field. This is the figure on the bottom. The gap has slightly widened recently, but this might just be a recent observation. Um, Although this gap is relatively large, this gap is not wide enough to explain why so few women are reaching the high level conducting positions. And one common explanation to explain why women aren't reaching these high level conducting positions is that women often opt out of conducting and instead stick with musical education and educating other conductors. And there is evidence for this, but this just this still won't shouldn't fully explain why women are so cut out of the top level symphony conducting jobs. And this shows that the disparity in gender in the profession of conducting has roots both in the low numbers of women actually participating in the career and also the general structure of the profession itself. So the message you can take from all this statistical evidence is that women can attain the role of conductor, and they do. However, they struggle to reach the upper echelons of the industry. This also may be due to a time lag, as women were historically set back and discriminated, and women are just now beginning to catch up with male peers and will slowly rise through the ranks. And on a positive note, there is evidence to support this claim as well, and many believe that once enough time has passed, women will be commonly taking conducting roles at the top symphonies. And there have been many articles that support this, that the age of male dominated classical music is over and women are now being able to come into the limelight and take the roles of the top jobs in symphonies as conductors and as instrumentalists. So now I want to talk about conducting's unique problem when tackling gender discrimination. So in ensembles, there was a lot of gender discrimination in the 20th century with instrumentalists, and recently there were many audition tactics taken to reduce gender discrimination. And these are things like blind auditions or ditching some sort of paperwork that could give the judges some cue on the gender of or appearance of the instrumentalist. And what this does is this makes the audition purely about the sound of the auditioner. And when blind auditions were put into place, many women started making high chairs in symphonies because the judges could no longer were no longer biased based on their gender. So these tactics were very successful in reducing gender discrimination in ensembles. Another thing that had taken place in the U.S. symphonies were openly denouncing the European way of purposefully blocking women from symphonies as a wrong and ineffective practice for the industry, because a lot of famous symphonies that kind of lead the industry, like Vienna Philharmonic and Berlin Philharmonic, were very obvious with their gender discrimination tactics. So many U.S. symphonies denounced this as an improper practice, and in fact, one of the really famous conductors dropped, quit working because a specific female instrumentalist was rejected, mostly on the grounds of her gender. So it has implications, gender discrimination in the modern world, and people are very critical of it. Another surprising factor is viewership. In when Maren Alslop became the first woman to conduct proms in its entire 120-year history, the BBC for this performance that she conducted had record viewership and made record profits from the performance. This shows that although classical music may be stubborn to change, the viewers of classical music and the listeners are intrigued and supportive of innovation. So the problem with conducting is that you cannot do blind auditions for conducting because so much of the performance as a conductor is based on your visual appearance and how you cooperate visually with instrumentalists. So this makes auditions purely up to judges, gatekeepers, and record labels who are often old and have been in the industry for a while and are more would make a decision more based on certainty as opposed to innovation and trying something new. Another factor is that conductors at high level symphonies tend to represent more than just the orchestra they conduct. They tend to be synonymous with the city or region that they represent. So often, when you think of New York, you might think of Leonard Bernstein, or Cleveland, you'll think of George Szell. So this means that it's not just up to the classical music industry to reduce gender discrimination, it's actually a full regional thing. So mediating this problem of gender discrimination will not be fixed by some sort of clever audition tactics or making judges impartial. It will require the Classical Music Society, and society in general to accept women as equal to men in the role of conducting and in leadership. So now I just want to talk about a specific female conductor that I personally actually know and have been conducted by. Her name is JoAnn Falletta. She was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1954. She's an American classical guitarist and conducted the Buffalo Philharmonic, the Virginia Symphony Orchestra, and today is the principal guest conductor at the Brevard Music Institute. She has won many conducting awards and has had a very decorated career. She's premiered over 100 works, many of which were by American composers. I had the opportunity to meet her over the summer at the Interlochen Arts Camp, and I'm actually out of time. So if you have any questions in general about my presentation or about my experience with Joanne Falletta, just I guess we'll ask them in the session. But I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you learned something new about conducting and women's role in the profession.